Chapter Introduction Episode 21 Selecting the Perfect Location. Cooperated out of obedience and had never hinted that she shared the slightest pleasure in the infamies whose daily victim she was. The bishop had left her in the most profound ignorance. Scarcely did she know how to read or write, and she had absolutely no idea of religion's existence. Her mind was natural. It was that of a child. She would give droll replies. She liked to play. She loved her sister a great deal, detested the bishop out of all measure, and feared the duke as she dreaded fire. On the wedding day, when she discovered herself naked and surrounded by the four men, she wept, and moreover did all that was asked of her, acting without pleasure as without ill temper. She was sober, very clean, and having no other fault but that of laziness. Nonchalance reigned in all her movements and doings and everywhere about her person. Despite the liveliness announced by her bright eyes, she abhorred the president almost as much as she hated her uncle, and D'Orsay, who treated her with no excess of consideration, nevertheless seemed to be the only one for whom she appeared to have no repugnance. These were the 8 principal characters in whose company we are going to enable you to live, good reader. It is now time to divulge the object of singular pleasures that were proposed. It is commonly accepted amongst authentic libertines that the sensations communicated by the organs of hearing are the most flattering, and those impressions are the liveliest. As a consequence, our 4 villains, who were of a mind to have voluptuousness implant itself in the very core of their beings, as deeply and as overwhelmingly as ever it could penetrate, had, to this end, devised something quite clever indeed. It was this: after having immured themselves within everything that was best able to satisfy the senses through lust, after having established this situation, the plan was to have described to them, in the greatest detail and in due order, every one of debauchery's extravagances, all its divagations, all its ramifications, all its contingencies, all of what is termed in libertine language its passions. There is simply no conceiving the degree to which man varies them when his imagination grows inflamed. Excessive may be the differences between men that is created by all their other manias, by all their other tastes, but in this case it is even more so, and he who should succeed in isolating and categorizing and detailing these follies would perhaps perform one of the most splendid labors which might be undertaken in the study of manners, and perhaps one of the most interesting. It would thus be a question of finding some individuals capable of providing an account of all these excesses, then of analyzing them, of extending them, of itemizing them, of graduating them, and of running a story through it all, to provide coherence and amusement. Such was the decision adopted. After innumerable inquiries and investigations, they located 4 women who had attained their prime. That was necessary. Experience was the fundamental thing here. 4 women, I say, who, having spent their lives in the most furious debauchery, had. Chapter Introduction Episode 22 Choosing the Castle reached the state where they could provide an exact account of all these matters, and, as care had been taken to select 4 endowed with a certain eloquence and a fitting turn of mind, after much discussion, recording, and arranging, all 4 were ready to insert, each into the adventures of her life, all the most extraordinary vagaries of debauch, and to do so in such an order and at such a pace that the first, for example, would work into the tale of her life's activities the 150 simple passions and the least esoteric or most ordinary deviations. The second, within the same framework, an equal number of more unusual passions involving 1 or more men with 1 or several women. The third was also to introduce into her narration 150 of the most criminal whimsies and those which most outrage the laws of both nature and religion, and as all these excesses lead to murder, and as these murders committed through libertinage are infinitely various, and are just as numerous as the occasions upon which the libertine's inflamed imagination adopts different tortures, the fourth was to adorn the events of her life with a meticulous report upon 150 assorted examples of them. In the meantime, our libertines, surrounded, as at the outset I indicated, by their wives, and also by other objects in every kind, were to pay close heed, were to be mentally heated, and were to end by extinguishing, by means of either their wives or those various objects, the conflagration the storytellers were to have lit. There is surely nothing more voluptuous in this project than the luxurious manner whereby it was carried out, and they are both this manner and these several recitations which are to compose this work. Wherewith, having said this much, I advise the overmodest to lay my book aside at once if he would not be scandalized. For 'tis already clear there's not much of the chaste in our plan, and we dare hold ourselves answerable in advance that there will be still less in its execution. Insomuch as the four actresses we have been speaking of play a most essential role in these memoirs, we believe, even were we to have to beg the reader's forgiveness, therefore, we should still feel obliged to describe them. They will narrate, they will act. Such being the case, is it possible that they remain unknown? Banish all expectation of beauties portrayed, although there were doubtless in the plans provisions for employing these four creatures, physically as well as morally. Be that as it may, neither their charms nor their years were the deciding factors, but rather their minds and their experience only that counted, and with what regards the latter, our friends could not possibly have made better choices. Madame Duclos was she to whom they entrusted the relating of the 150 simple passions. The woman who went by this name was 48 years of age, still in fairly good condition, and preserving the vestiges of beauty. She had very handsome eyes, an exceedingly fair skin, and one of the most splendid and plumpest asses that could ever favor your gaze. A mouth both clean and fresh, superb breasts, and pretty brown hair, a heavy figure, but a noble one, and all the looks and tone of a brilliant whore. She had spent her life, as shall be observed, in places and under circumstances where indeed she had been obliged to study what she is. Chapter Introduction, Episode 23, The Fortress of Solitude. Going to relate and to see her was to realize she must have gone to the task with wit and verve, with ease and interest. Madame Champville was a tall woman about 50, slender, well-made, having the most voluptuous quality in her look and bearing. A faithful devotee of Sappho, she had that kind of expression, even in her slightest movements, in her simplest gestures, in her least words. She had ruined herself for the sake of keeping girls, and, had it not been for this predilection, to which she generally sacrificed everything she was able to earn abroad, she might have been comfortably well-to-do. For a long time, she had been in public service, and during recent years had been making her way as an outfitter in her turn, but had confined herself to a limited practice, her clients being reliable rakehels of a certain age. Never did she receive young men, and this prudent conduct was lucrative and did something to improve her affairs. She had been blonde, but a more venerable tint, and that of wisdom was beginning to color her hair. Her eyes were still exceedingly attractive, blue, and they contained a most agreeable expressiveness. Her mouth was lovely, still fresh, missing no teeth as yet. She was flat-chested, but had a belly which was good, but had never aroused envy. Her mound was rather prominent. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. One strange, and assuredly very rare thing, above all in Paris, she was as much a maid on this side as a girl emerging from a convent, and perhaps, had it not been for the accursed part she put to use with people who cared for nothing but the extraordinary, and whom, consequently, That sighed pleased. Perhaps, I say, had it not been for that park, this singular virginity might have perished with her. Madame Martin, a portly matron of 52, very well preserved and very healthy, and blessed with the biggest and most beautiful rump one could wish for, boasted the precise opposite by way of adventure. She had devoted her life to sodomitical debauch, and was so well familiarized therewith, she tasted absolutely no joy save therefrom. A natural deformity, she had also been blessed with an obstruction. Having prevented her from knowing any other, she had given herself over to this kind of pleasure, led to it both by her inability to do anything else, and by early habit, in consideration of which she clung fast to this lubricity wherein 'twas declared she was yet delicious, ready to brave come what might, dreading nothing. The most monstrous engines were as naught to her. In fact, such were the ones she preferred, and the sequel to these papers will perhaps reveal her, still giving valorous fight beneath the standards of Sodom, as the most intrepid of bugresses. Her features were gracious enough, but signs of languor and of decline. Chapter Introduction. Episode 24. Recruiting trusted servants were beginning to mar her attractions, and but for the plumpness sustaining her yet, she might have been thought time-worn and frayed. As for Madame de Grange, she was vice and lust personified. Tall, thin, 56, ghostly pale, and emaciated. Dead dull eyes, dead lips, she offered an image of crime about to perish for lack of strength. She had once upon a time been brunette. There were some who even maintained she'd had a beautiful body. Not long thereafter, it had become a mere skeleton, capable of inspiring nothing but disgust. Her ass, withered, worn, marked, torn, more resembled marbled paper than human skin, and its hole was so gaping, sprung, and rugose that the bulkiest machines could, without her knowing a thing, penetrate it dry. By way of crowning graces, this generous Cytherean athlete, wounded in several combats, was missing one nipple and 3 fingers. She limped and was without 6 teeth and an eye. We may perhaps learn by what order of attacks she had been so mistreated. But one thing is certain, nothing she had suffered had induced her to mend her ways. And if her body was the picture of ugliness, her was the depository of all the most unheard of vices and crimes. An arsonist, a parricide, a sodomite, a tribade, a murderess, a poisoner, guilty of incest, of rape, of theft, of abortions, and of sacrileges. One might truthfully affirm that there is not a single crime in the world this villain had not committed herself, or had others commit for her. Her present calling was procuring. She was one of society's most heavily titled furnishers, and as to much experience, she joined a more or less agreeable prattle. She had been chosen to fill the role of 4th storyteller, that is to say, the one in whose story the greatest number of infamies and horrors were to be combined. Who better than a creature who had performed them all could have played this part? These women once found, and found in every article, to be such as was desired. The friends turned their attentions to accessories. They had from the outset planned to surround themselves with a large number of lust-inspiring objects of either sex. But when it was brought to their attention that the only setting in which this lubricious roister could conveniently be held was that same chateau in Switzerland belonging to D'Ursay, the one in which he had dispatched little Elvire. When, I say, it was remarked that this chateau of only moderate size would not be able to lodge so great a throng of inhabitants, and that, what was more, it might well prove unwise or dangerous to bring along such a host. The list of subjects was trimmed to 32 in all, the storytellers included, to wit, 4 of that class, 8 young girls, 8 young boys, 8 men endowed with monstrous members for the delights of passive sodomy, and 4 female servants. But thoroughness went into the recruiting of all that. A year was devoted to these details. An enormous amount of money, too. And these are the measures they employed to obtain the most delicious specimens of all France could offer in the way of 8 little girls. 16 intelligent procuresses, each accompanied by 2 lieutenants, were sent into the 16 major provinces of
Chapter Introduction, Episode 25, Turning the Castle into a Prison, France, while a 17th was occupied with the same work in Paris only. Each of these outfitters was given a rendezvous at one of the Duke's estates on the outskirts of Paris, and all of them were to appear there, during the same week, exactly 10 months after the date of their departure. This was the period they were given for searching. Each was to bring back 9 subjects, which came to a total of 153 girls, from which 153 a choice of only 8 was to be made. The procuresses were instructed to emphasize high birth, virtuousness, and the most delicious visage possible. They were to conduct their researches so as to draw material chiefly from eminent families, and were not to hand over any girl without being able to prove that she had been forcibly abducted from either a convent housing pensionnaires of quality or from the home of a family, and that a family of distinction. Whatever was not superior to the class of bourgeoisie, and what from these upper classes was not both very virtuous and wholly virgin and impeccably beautiful, would be refused without mercy. Spies were posted to survey these women's proceedings and to supply the society with exhaustive and prompt reports of what they were doing. For each suitable subject found, they were paid 30,000 francs, the agents assuming all expenses. The costs were incredible. With respect to age, it was fixed at from 12 to 15. Anything above or between was pitilessly rejected. At the same time, under identical circumstances, with the same means, at the same expense, 17 ages of sodomy likewise scoured the capital and the provinces in search of little boys, and their rendezvous was set for a month after the selection of the girls. As for the young men whom we propose henceforth to designate as fuckers, the size of the member was the sole criterion. Nothing under 10 or 11 inches long by 7 or 8 around was acceptable. 8 men labored throughout the kingdom to supply this demand, and their rendezvous was scheduled to fall a month after the little boys. While the story of how these selections were made and received is not our foremost concern, it might not be inappropriate at this point to insert a word on the subject in order to bring out yet a little more of our 4 heroes' genius. It seems to me that nothing which serves to enlarge the reader's understanding of these figures and to shed light upon a party as extraordinary as the one we are going to describe can be judged irrelevant. The time for the assembling of the little girls having arrived, everyone converged upon the Duke's estate. Some few procuresses having been unable to fill their quota of 9, some others having lost their charges en route, either by illness or flight. Only 130 of them were present at the rendezvous. But what charms, great God! Never, I believe, have so many charms been seen gathered together in one place. 13 days were given over to this examination.